Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Connie's Corner. So, in my what my daughter affectionately calls our Bananas Over Broadway series, today I'm going to be talking about the latest show that we saw just last week, Les Miserables. Um, an oldie but a goodie. I'm a big fan of the '80s mega musical, as you'll find out as we continue to move forward. Um, so, it's a little context before I get into this show specifically. I planned to do this with this channel, and then the pandemic hit, and I kind of put it on the back burner. But now that my daughter has shown interest in Broadway, and we're going to as many Broadway level shows as possible and Broadway itself, because we are technically close enough, um, it just made sense to revive the series. So that's the overall idea. Specifically, now she asked to see a show that I was like, I don't know if I want to see that, and I live in the Northeast, so there's a lot of major cities close to me. I'm like, okay, well, it's not like all I have is this one city next to me, which most people have to deal with. They're like, this is the only thing that's close. So if I go to a Broadway level touring show, this is where I go. I have choices. I can go to several cities, actually. So I was clicking at all the theaters that I thought were reasonable driving distance, and I found the Kimmy Cultural Campus in Philadelphia. And they actually had very reasonably priced tickets, considering the level of entertainment that you're getting. So I wanted to explain this theater a little bit because all the shows that I see, well, not all the shows, a good chunk of shows I'm going to see if I'm a little iffy about them are going to be in this space. And I wanted to give a little shout out to this particular theater in Philadelphia in case you're in reasonable driving distance, if you consider that. It's a very large space, very traditional looking, very opulent, looks like an old timey vintage kind of theater. When you think of a Broadway theater, this is the kind of theater you picture. And it has 4 layers of seating. So obviously it has the orchestra, the base layer, and then it has 3 sets of balcony. I am not used to that. I'm used to one or one in a skosh of a second one, not 3. Now, I'm trying to see as many shows as possible. And to a large extent, I'm not one of those people who believes in that there is a bad seat, like in terms of proximity to the stage. I don't think that your closeness to the stage means you have a better experience necessarily. It's all in how the room is shaped, right? I think it's more important to be as close to the middle as possible. You don't have to be in the middle, but you want to be just off on either side of the middle. The closer you are to the edge, like all those precious box seats that they like to put in theaters, yeah, people might like that because then they feel close to the action, and that's good. But if you're on the extreme left or right, you might miss things that are happening on your side of the stage because of the proximity. Like it'd be like watching a movie from the side of your TV. It's an odd angle, but people pay big money to sit there. So maybe it's just because of the vibe, the physical atmosphere that you get more so than the finer details that's happening on stage. To each their own. Everyone can eat as they like. So to get as many shows as possible, the third balcony up is only like $29. That's the price point right now. And I was like, well, I'd be willing to pay that. We can always change it later because they wanted you to buy a bundle too. You didn't have to, but if you wanted to have more choices of seating, it's, you buy your tickets early and so you get the bundle. And so I got the show that she wanted to see, which we're going to see in June. So I'll talk about that in June. And it was like, okay, you have to pick 2 other shows. And I looked and they're all good shows. Like they had Chicago in there and Lion King, both of which I've seen. I'm like, mm-hmm. But then I saw that Les Mis was coming here. It's November of 2022. This is the tour that was halted due to the pandemic, and it's scheduled through at least June of 23. But I think they're intending to tour this for 2 years, as they should. This is a classic. This is considered one of the world's most beloved musicals. Whenever they do polls, this is always like in the top 10 of best musicals ever made. And there's a reason for that. So I just clicked on this without thinking. I've seen this show before, but it's been a while. Gosh, I think I was in college. So it's been a minute. And it took actually going and watching this show for me to remember, like, oh my God, this show is so good. It took a minute. So Now, the only thing I don't like about being in the third balcony is obviously the higher you get, the more narrow it gets. So the seats are, I mean, I'm used to theater seating being small, but this was slim. I am just comfortable enough. My husband has legs and arms that go on forever, so it's hard for him. And I bought the bundle, and all of our seats are in the same, they're all in that third balcony, but they're not in the same section. And so I said, this is the litmus test. If we don't like these seats, we are going to change them. And he's like, no, we already bought them. We have them. Let's just, if we do the bundle next year, maybe we'll come down to another balcony because the seats do get wider because you can see down. It's a U-shaped audience. It's very dramatically a U. It's not like that the traditional fan style. It's a hard U. So you can, if you're in the middle, especially, you can really see the other seats very, very well. So yeah, always keep your comfort level in mind when you're buying tickets to a show. If you have choices, like, oh, I could see it in this theater or this theater, or it's on Broadway. Do you want to see it there, or do you want to wait until it's on tour? Whatever. Really do your homework, and they have all these wonderful apps now where you can go to the theater and be like, what is the view from this seat like, and read reviews. People will say things like, oh, if leg room's important, you want to sit over here. If being close to the action is important, these are the better seats. Not every theater has bathrooms on every level at an easy convenience. Like some theaters, like the men's room is over here and the women's room is over there. If bathrooms are important, maybe you should be on the side that's as close to the bathroom as possible so you don't have to go too far because the line will be long because hello, it always is, right? Anyway, I don't mean to spend so much time in the theater. I just wanted to give a shout out because I possibly will be seeing a lot of shows in this space. And so I just wanted to talk about that. Always do your research. It was a very comfortable space. What we really loved, so to start off the review of the show itself, of this exact presentation, the acoustics were so good. Lately, no, not lately. If I'm honest, my whole life, every time I go to a live show, there are moments when I'm like, what? It's not because I'm getting old. I even did this when I was like 14. There's a lot of shows where I feel like I'll pick a seat. You can't know this until you're sitting there, that maybe it's not good from a sound perspective. I really liked this theater. And I got, again, I don't know how much of it is up to the individual tour, because I'm sure they're using their own gear, but do they set it up right? And the room still has an effect. I could hear everything really, really well. And I kept like going about that. Like, that sounds like a dumb thing, but I've been to a lot of shows and it's not like you don't have fun, but at the same time, you're like, oh, I don't know how well I can hear this. I could hear this show very well. All right, so let's get to the reason you probably clicked on the video. Let's talk about Les Mis. So this is a beautiful show. This is definitely in my top 5. I say it's my second favorite musical. I don't know for sure, but it's definitely in my top 5. I'm an 80s child. I was a child in the 80s. So I can't help but go toward things that were invented as part of my time, even though that wasn't really my time because I was too young to appreciate such things. I like all shows from all genres and all time periods, but Les Mis is very, very special. I'm going to be spoiling it a little bit. It's almost 40 years old. So if you don't want to know the plot of this, you shouldn't have clicked on this because I will be talking about some plot elements. So why is this so special? I think the music alone makes this a very important show. And of course, the themes overall. The themes are, it's not about, kings and queens and dukes and duchesses and all that. It's a show about the poor. It's a show about the common man, presumably us, right? And what it means to survive. And there's a lot of characters in it. So, and they all have different choices. Some of them choose the righteous path, and some of them choose the easiest path, and some of them are in it's a dog eat dog world. So maybe you condone what I'm in, or you don't like what I'm doing. But if you were in my shoes and you were desperate, I think you would drop some of your morals. And that's true to a point. What would you do if you were starving, if you were struggling, if you're in it's near them kind of situation? And I think the reason the musical is still here is because they've done it 5,000 times. So let's say you're new to Les Mis and you're like, oh, there's so many versions. Which one should I listen to or watch? If you want my honest opinion, you could jump in with any of them. Because if you become a Les Mis aficionado, you're going to find your favorites. It'll either be the first one you do listen to or watch, or as you get to know it, you'll start to have certain feelings about the themes and the characters, and then that'll help you decide which one you think is the best. So there's plenty of audio recordings and there's a couple of pro shots, but I'm going to use that term lightly because Les Mis is the kind of show where when they film it, they like to do it concert style where the actors are technically in a costume, but they're singing into a microphone. There's not a lot of scenery. Oh, there's probably no scenery actually, and just a few props. So it's a very beautiful tale. It is very sad. But there's moments of levity. They don't completely forego comedy. There's some comedic bits, some characters who their sole purpose is to be like, hey, don't get too sad, right? And now a lot of people are attached, because it's an old show, a lot of people are attached to the original. Now, I believe the original staging of the show was on a turntable. I saw it on Broadway, but it's another British import. I'm assuming the London version had a turntable. And I saw it. I don't remember it hardcore. But at the time, it was the first show I saw with a rotating stage, but I've seen lots of shows with rotating stage, so it doesn't feel special anymore to me. But to me, Les Mis, it's not about the spectacle, even though it has spectacle. It's very much about the music and the characters. And since there's so many, everyone has their favorite, just like how are you team this or team that? You can get on board with some of these characters and really hate other characters, right? Now, this new production does not have a turntable. Now, you could chalk that up to, well, it's the touring version. Why would they? I've heard from hardcore Les Mis fans that they take umbrage with this. They are really not okay with the turntable being gone. I was okay with it because it's not like they don't have sets. I love that it feels like old time theater where if the screen right here is the stage, like things float in and float out, or a wall comes down and then it would go because it's really a door and then go back. So I'm a technical person. I went to school to study lighting design specifically, but I dabbled in props and costumes and scenery. I wanted to learn a little bit of everything. So I appreciate the technical aspects of this show. I go for the music. Like I could just sit there and listen to it, but that's not why you physically go to a show. You go to have the visual experience too. And I think there's a lot to look at. It's always changing because it's a very long show. But because there's so much going on and they're constantly changing locations and there's time jumps in the story, I feel like you can't possibly get bored. There's just too much stimuli happening, right? I really appreciate what they did visually in this production. The lighting was spectacular. The costumes are classic. I don't think they're identical to the original costumes, but I think they're close enough where you're like, oh yeah, I know who that is. And that looks like that character if you're really attached to that character, right? So all the technical things are really, really good. The cast was amazing. I want to give a shout out to, make sure I get the name right. So again, I've seen the show a lot, not in person, but I mean, I have the 25th anniversary on DVD, and I always mess this up when I read it live on this thing. Okay, the part of Marius was played by Gregory Lee Rodriguez. I never like Marius. He's such a small character in the grand scheme of the show, but because he's at the end, he kind of feels important because he's one of the last things you see. And I've never liked that character, but I really liked this particular actor's take on him. So when they get to the song called A Heart Full of Love, it's very Romeo and Juliet. In this version, Cosette is actually on a balcony and there's a window and you can see that she's behind the window, but she has a balcony that she could come out on. She just hasn't done it yet. And because every staging I've seen, he's supposed to talk to her through a gate. So he's this student who's part of a revolutionary uprising. But one day he bumps into a young girl who just happens to walk down the street, and her name's Cosette. And they're supposed to have a little romantic interlude through a gate. And this part of the plot is very silly because they just see each other and they fall in love. They don't know each other. They don't know each other's names. So they're just like, I love that person. This is high melodrama, which is fine. It's in theme with the show and with the time period and the styling of how the show is being told. So just suspend your disbelief, people, okay? People didn't live to be very, very old back then, even though some of the characters in this show do. you could, this is still a time period where you could die at any moment. So I think people were like, yeah, we don't have time to waste with courting. We just got to get to the marriage part. Anyway, so I'm going to butcher this because I'm not a singer. Let me just disclaimer right now, but I have to mimic what he did because it was just so enchanting. So he's standing there and he's serenading her, and he's supposed to go, a heart full of love, a heart full of song, and he's acting all timid. So his version was like he was like a heart full of love, a heart full of love. It was so. I actually laughed. It was so charming. I like that he. I've never seen Marius play that like that where he starts timid and then he's like, I gotta sound manly, so I'm gonna sing it again, but I'm gonna go. Oh. It's just said I love actors' little touches like that. I've never seen that in Marius before, but it really endeared the character to me, and I was like, I'm on board with this guy. I mean, he's not a bad character. There's no reason to hate Marios. I always thought, oh, he's just kind of there. But that Little Woman did wonders for me. So that's my shout out for this particular cast. All right, so another element that I found interesting. So backstory: when the show was over and we were leaving, my daughter turns to me. She's 12 and said, "What is this show about?" And I threw it right back to her, and I was like, "Why don't you tell me what you think the show's about, and I'll fill in the blank spots because it's a lot of plot. It's a lot of plot." And she gave me her description, and I was like, "You're pretty spot on. You're only missing a few things." And so this is where I get into a spoiler. So if you haven't seen Les Mis and you don't want to know, um, click away. Maybe I'll put a time code here of like, click to this part right here. Um, she then asked me, in Act Two, did that guy commit suicide? Now, I can't believe she even knows what suicide is, but I was like, yes, very good. In theater, you don't have the luxury that film has. In film, you can do anything, but in theater, you have to simulate a lot of things. Like you have to like, see, we're on the ocean. Like they have to do these. It sounds really corny or tacky, but you understand why you have to do it because you're physically in the room with the storytelling elements of the scenery and this and the actors and all that. So there's this character Javert. He's the antagonist, to our protagonist of the show. But is he the villain? I don't know if the show has like a straight up clear. Well, no, the Thénardiers are villains, but Javert is supposed to be the villain, but he's not really a villain. Anyway, the crux of this whole show is our protagonist Jean Valjean is a man on the run. He committed a small crime, and he compounded it by making bad choices, so it got bigger and got away from him. But he escapes, and the person who was in charge of the prison that he was kept in at the beginning of the show can't handle the fact that someone got away. Like, oh, he's the fugitive that got away. So he hunts him over time, and so by the end of the show, he's been chasing him. They've had all these encounters, and Javert gets captured by the revolutionary students who agree to let Valjean do whatever they want with him as their prisoner. So since he's tied up, he's at the mercy of our protagonist, and he's convinced. He's like, well, this is probably what you've been waiting for. I've been chasing you and making your life a living hell, so you get to kill me. This is how the game played out, and it's fair because he's a righteous man. It's very important. So he's convinced that he's going to die by Valjean's hand, and Valjean does not kill him. He lets him go because that's who Valjean is. Valjean is you know, um, he's a metaphor for all things righteous. He's actually a very good person. He just made one bad choice because he was desperate. He all he did was steal bread. So being a thief is not good. But when you're hungry, you start to, again, the law doesn't matter so much because it's between you and death, right? But that's like all he did. He didn't kill people, he didn't rob all the time. It was like a one-time offense, but it's like, oopsie, got caught your first time doing something. As far as we know from the story told here. But he spends the whole show saving people and showing kindness because kindness was taught to him. That gives him his big epiphany moment. So Javert in his mind is no exception. He's like, I know this, maybe you think this is personal, but I don't. I look at this as you were just doing your job. You're a policeman. You're supposed to chase bad, the ones that get away. Technically, I did break the law, but I am not a bad person. And I'm going to prove it to you now by not killing you. And well, Javert can't handle this mentally. So he does go to a bridge and he commits suicide. Now, I've seen the show a couple times. And every time we get to this part, I'm always curious to see how they're going to do it. I've seen it where he just stands there and he goes, oh, because he sings a song and he'll just hold the last note and kind of arches back and like, look, I'm falling. I have seen productions where there's a bridge suspended above the stage and he actually does jump because there'll be a trap door so he can go through that and land on a mat or something, I'm sure. Now, in this production, he gets up on the ledge of the bridge, but the bridge was on the stage. I was like, what's he going to do? And I was like, well, maybe there's a trap door and I just can't see it. But then when he says the last note, he goes, oh, like this. And I don't know how they got the wires on him because he was in a spotlight. I'd like to think you would have noticed them. But he starts going up and the bridge would recede backwards. So like he wasn't moving, but the set was moving around him to show that he was falling. It was very well done, very simple, not extravagant at all, but effective. And it did communicate what was going on because my 12-year-old was able to pick it up. Now you might be thinking, you took her to the show and she didn't understand. Well, here's some downsides, not to me, but I understand to other people why this would be a downside. This is a show where they sing the entire time. There's very few spoken lines. It's not your traditional musical. A traditional musical is a narrative with characters who have a series of events and a plot and rising action and climax and da 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 da. But you have your exposition song and your I'm falling in love with you song and the villain song. So it'll have like a dozen songs sprinkled in there, but then there's a lot of talking. Les Mis is not that show. And my husband went to this show too, and he liked it, but he was like, yeah, did they have to sing everything? It's like, you want them to cut songs? Well, who's making that choice? Sophie, not me. I don't love every single song in the show, but I also don't think you should cut any of them. I just think this is a show where the stylistic choice is to sing it because when you just explain what the show is, you're like, it's about this, and then this happens, and then this happens. Saying it through words really takes a lot of the je ne sais quoi out of the show, and it sounds really stupid. Like, well, it's just this guy, he steals some bread, and a guy chases him, and he adopts a girl, and she grows up, and she meets a guy that she doesn't even know, and they fall in love, and then they have their revolution, and then everyone dies. Like it's like, okay, not everyone dies. A lot of people die in this show. The title is a foreshadowing, like that's not a random title. It explains a lot, actually. When you just kind of say the plot quickly like that, I left big chunks out, but if you wanted to Les Mis in 1 minute, it sounds stupid when you speak it. The story comes across so much better in song format. So yes, it's a long show. The original show, I believe, was just over 3 hours. The problem with the Broadway show being that long is you have to start paying people overtime. I don't know why they thought they could get away with that. They should have known that that was not a self-sustaining business model. So it's almost 40 years old. Over the years, it's been trimmed a lot. A lot of internal things, and then like, oh, we're just going to cut this little line. And apparently, in the original show, there were a couple songs that were cut. I've never heard them, so I'm not sad. People who saw Les Mis when it first opened or close enough to that time so they could get their hands on those copies, because I think they still exist. They're the people who are probably the most upset that this show has changed. But theater is a living, breathing entity. It's hard to do it exactly the same all the time. Even if you don't want things to change, even if you're working very hard to maintain the sameness, it's going to change anyway. I'm just not a hardcore Les Mis fan where I know what those changes are, so I can't speak to that. I only bring it up because it is such a big part of the Les Mis fandom that they feel very passionately about this project. But as a just a notch down from the crazy fans, like the crazy obsessed, they're the reason this thing is like, I'm like the next tier down. I was very happy with this production. I did not miss the turntable. I thought it was okay that it was gone. To me, all the important musical numbers are still there. Like there's little interludes sometime in between songs. That's the stuff that usually gets cut or rearranged. I think that's so small that it's fine. It does not hurt the overall picture of this show, right? So Les Mis is very special, and I'm so happy that it is going on tour. You know, like you worried when the longer we were in our shutdown from the pandemic, the more I was like, what if nothing comes back? That would be horrible. And even if Broadway comes back, does it have to be all new things? So this is another example of something that got interrupted, and thankfully they were able to pick it back up. So I think in a post-pandemic world, this may sound like the musical we don't need because it's like, oh, it's so sad and but it's really a musical about hope. It's about the human, you know, humans as we know it and the human spirit enduring and surviving horrible things. And it ends on a high note. It really does, put you in a good place. So you may think this is not the musical for you if you've never seen it, but it's really, really good. I can't recommend it enough. So if you haven't seen it, it's on tour. Keep an eye out. Just put in, Les Mis 2022, 2023 North American tour. That I know for sure is going. But this is a worldwide musical. It's played in hundreds of countries and it's been translated into hundreds of languages. If you haven't seen Les Mis and you're a theater person, that's a giant hole in your repertoire. Everyone should just have this somewhere in the recesses of their brain. There's something for everyone. Yes, it's long. Yes, they sing the entire time, and that can be a problem, but they put so much love and care into this that you will not be disappointed. You are definitely getting your money's worth. So, and I only paid $29. It's worth more than that. So I definitely felt like I got my money's worth. I had a wonderful time. I cried. This show always makes me cry, but usually it's like so beautiful. Oh my god. And the songs are very moving. I had a very good audience. They clapped, and they clapped really big after the really, really big numbers, the classic, everyone who knows what Les Mis is. Oh, these are the songs we're here to listen to. So I could tell that I was in a room full of people who definitely have, some strong feelings about this show. I'm sure there were brand new people in the audience too, like my family, the two of them. But it was well received. So I can't stress enough how important I think it is to include this show in your life if you can. If you don't have the means to see this show right now, because inflation and the pandemic hurt us economically, is still hurting us. Like Ukraine and Russia, all that stuff's hurting us economically. Luckily, this show is so beloved. Even though this might be a limited tour, it's going to come back. This is a show that just keeps coming back. It's just that popular. So don't fret. I don't want you to feel like, oh, she told me to go see it and I can't. That's okay. It's actually okay if you can't. But rest assured that you will have other opportunities. This is just one of those safe shows that I'm like, oh, it's never really going to be gone. They will find a way to bring it back into the fold. So don't feel pressured. I love this show so much. I love theater so much. Please go support theater. That's always my mantra here. Do whatever you can. It doesn't even have to be Broadway level. I know I'm talking about Broadway level stuff, but that's because that's what we all know. Support your local churches if they do productions. Support your local high schools. It doesn't have to be Broadway itself. If you can't go to Broadway, great. But it's kind of far. If you live, on the West Coast, or even in the Central Time Zone, that's still a trek. Not everyone can go. Just go experience theater however you can get it. It's really, really good for us. It's what separates us from the animals, right? It's so good for your soul. Gots to do it. All right. So that's this month's musical. I have more coming. Like I said, my daughter and I are going bananas over Broadway, as we call it. So look for more videos. We got some shows coming up. All right. So that's it for now, and I'll see you next time. Bye.